All right. Good evening, everyone. We are so glad that you are here with us tonight for our financial aid information session. I'm Mila Tappan from FAME, and with me tonight is the fabulous Nikki Vachon. Nikki will introduce herself in just a moment. She and I are going to share this presentation tonight so that you don't have to listen to me talk all night. We'll split it up, and our goal tonight is to help all of you feel much more comfortable with the financial aid process. So that's our ultimate goal for tonight. What we would love to have you do if you're interested is to join the FAME mailing list. You can go to famemain.com/join. It's in the chat. And what you can do there is you can decide if you'd like to join our email list, or you can sign up to get texts from us. And we would love to have you do that. What we will be doing is just providing periodic texts and information. We won't inundate you, we promise, but just provide hopefully timely and helpful hints and tips and information to make this process a little bit easier. So tonight, what we'd love to have you do, because we are doing a webinar and we can't see you and we can't hear you, unfortunately, we'd love to have you put questions in the chat or in the Q&A, whatever works for you. Because what we will do is we will stop periodically and address those questions. So I can guarantee that if you've got a question, someone else has that same question. So please ask those questions and we will do our absolute best to answer them or follow up on them if need be. So tonight, our goal, like I said, is to help people feel comfortable with the financial aid process. We're really going to focus in specifically like on the next 6 months. So, we're in the spring. We want to get you kind of through the fall, the end of the year, in the first part of the process. There's a lot to take in. We know that. So we want to kind of break it down into chunks and more bite-sized pieces. So we're going to spend a little bit more time on the front half of the presentation talking about what's going to happen in the next 6 months, but provide a little bit of information as to what happens later. But we want you to know that we will be doing these sorts of presentations all throughout the process. So tonight is really just to get you started. I did send an email out today, so it has information in it, including this presentation, and a link to pay, which is what you see in front of you. Our publication, that's our financial aid publication that focuses on everything we're going to talk about tonight. In pay, you're going to find more information on what we're discussing. And down at the bottom of our slides, we'll actually have what page of pay has that additional information. So whether you want to come back later or follow along in pay, whatever works for you, that is great for us. So with that, I would like to hand this over to Nikki to get us started. And let me just say, first of all, you can see what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the overview of financial aid. We're going to talk about the steps, the types of financial aid, what's going to happen when you get your financial aid offer, a little bit about what a V8 isn't enough, and some additional resources. So sorry I skipped that. Now I'd like to hand it over to Nikki.
Hey everybody, I am Nikki Vachon, college access counselor, stepmom of 3, been where you are, so I get it. Even knowing this business, I get the panic. But don't worry, because financial aid is there to help pay for college, right? So just to go with an overview, financial aid is, we break it up into 2 categories. There's merit-based aid and there's need-based aid. Mila, you just went away from the presentation.
Yeah, because I was going to go grab a link. Sorry about that, kiddo.
That's okay. That's all right. So the 2 types of financial aid is merit-based aid and need-based aid. So merit-based aid is something that you would get for doing something awesome. Like at the school I worked at, we had merit aid for having great grades or great SAT scores. So something that you did great, you could get maybe some financial aid for doing that. Other schools might give you a scholarship, some merit aid for being a great athlete or musician or actor or whatever it is that school is looking for in a student. That's the merit aid. Then once you get accepted, the financial aid office will look at your Fafsa. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. And that the financial aid office awards what's called need-based aid. So they look at your financial need and they will offer that kind of aid. So how do they figure out what your financial need is? By looking at your Fafsa. And we're going to talk about how to apply for that in a second. But just to tell you about the Fafsa, this is one form we do every single year in October. FAFSA stands for Free Application for Federal Student Aid. Emphasis on free. I don't ever want you to pay someone to do this. We'll help you for free. It's not even that awful, but if you want someone to walk you through, we're here for you. I want every single senior, and we're not going to do this until senior year, so don't feel like you need to get ahead of the 8 ball, and you got to wait till October of senior year to fill out the FAFSA. And the FAFSA, people will say sometimes, I'm not going to do it because, we're not going to get anything, or I'm just not sure what my plans are. That one is my favorite. I want every single senior to do the FAFSA for a few different reasons. There's no downside. Let's just start there. You do the FAFSA. If you decide not to go to school for some reason, or to take a gap year, it's free. It's taking half an hour. It's just sitting there waiting for you. So if you do decide to go, that piece is done. And you've met deadlines. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. Deadlines are so important, because if you wait and you say, I'm not going to do the FAFSA, and then just before school starts, you say, okay, I'm going to go to school, I'm going to do the FAFSA, right before the start of your freshman year, you may have missed some deadlines and missed some free money. Whereas if you just did it back in October, you'd have met those deadlines. So I want everyone to do it. That's one reason. Second reason, sometimes just to get a scholarship, if you're applying for a scholarship, the application will ask for the results of your FAFSA. Not always, but sometimes. So even if you don't think you're going to qualify for aid, sometimes scholarships were asked for that. And then my last reason really is that even if you just want to take out a student loan, the best type of student loan that you can get, you have to do the FAFSA in order to get it. So definitely every single senior, I want you guys to do the FAFSA. You want to move ahead for me? And feel free to jump in, Mila, if there's anything I missed. Okay, so we broke this into 3 steps to applying for financial aid. First step is we're going to get ready to apply for aid. The first step is really just doing some research. You guys are probably already looking at some colleges that you're interested in, you're thinking about, but you don't ever really know how much it costs to go there until you apply for financial aid, get your financial aid offer, and then you know how much school costs. Well, I've got a tip for you guys. You can go to the school's website and use what's called a net price calculator. This is it's just a tool. It's like a calculator on the school's website where you plug in your information, your grades, your income, how many people have to live on that income in the household, and that will give you an estimate of how much financial aid they'll give you. This is so key to be doing, especially if we get juniors with us tonight, because this is a great conversation starter of saying, okay, this is what it looks like for me to go to school out of pocket for 1 year. That's what net price means. The cost minus any grants and scholarships, that's your net cost. So having that conversation right now, with students and family members, you can say, hey, we've got some money saved up for you, or listen, we don't have money saved up for you. This is going to be on you. Let's talk about how we afford that school. And if they have great financial aid, awesome. But sometimes it's not always super aid, and you're going to have to do some kind of calculations of how I'm going to make this happen. So it's great to have that conversation right now. But that's also great to say, hey, you know what? I really like that school. It's going to be super expensive. So I'm going to apply to a variety of schools to make sure I have an affordable option. So definitely do that research now. And then you can go to the school's website, the Big Future website. If you guys have ever used the College Board website, Big Future is a college search engine where it's got a filter. I think that's on the next slide, Mila. Can you move that ahead? Yeah, so on the left-hand side, there's a filter section where you can say, show me all the schools in Maine, or show me all the schools that offer nursing programs, or a sport that you really want to play. But at the bottom, you can see there's a little paying feature where you can show all of the schools that meet at least 60% of financial need. So if you're going to need a lot of financial aid to go to school, this is a great way to say, you know what, I didn't know that this school has the major I want, but also has a great financial aid package. So this is another way to kind of open up the number of schools you can apply for. You know what I mean? It gives you some more ideas of places to apply. All right, Mila, I'm going to have you go ahead. Yep, perfect. So I talked a little bit about deadlines, and whenever I see the word deadline on a school's website, I always equate that to money. For me, when I see deadline, I think about at the school I worked at, we had a deadline for everything, right? We had a FAFSA priority deadline. And that means that in order to get my school's financial aid, our need-based aid, you had to file your FAFSA by a certain date. To get the merit aid, you have to apply for admissions by a certain date. So I just want to say that deadlines are so important that we made there's a publication that if we were in person, we would be giving out to you. It's called Pay. It's Tips for Higher Education. If you go to FameMain, Mila, can you put that in the chat? FameMain.com, or you know what? I'll just tell people.
Well, Nikki, can I just say real quick, one of my issues, that's why I was going to the other screen. Usually I can go to the other screen and I can grab the links, but that's why I'm not putting links in right now.
Got it. I got it
that.
right here. I'm going to add that right now.
Okay. I'm sorry.
No, that's totally fine. That happens to me too, I have to tell you, and I don't know why that happens. On our website, we have a ton of publications, but this Pay publication really has everything in this presentation. But also we put in there a checklist of deadlines to look for. When is the FAFSA deadline? When do you have to apply for admissions? Just things to look at. I think that's super helpful. But also, as you guys are doing research, it's great to know, what are they going to need for you to apply for financial aid? Well, we already know you're going to do the FAFSA because all schools ask for that. But they may also ask for this other form called the CSS Profile. And the CSS Profile is not every school needs this. There's only 3 schools in Maine that ask for it. It's Colby, Bates, and Bowdoin. And the reason why I feel like they ask for that is because those schools meet 100% of the students' financial need. They have a lot of campus-based aid. They give away a lot of their own money, right? So they use the FAFSA to figure out your need, but then they use this CSS Profile to do a deeper dive to just really make sure they're getting the right dollars to the right student. So the CSS Profile is just, it's a deeper dive into your family's situation. So cssprofile.org has some great information on how to fill that out if you get stuck. When I did this for my stepdaughter, I think there was a chat that I used, super helpful. But definitely, if you guys have questions while you are doing this, give us a call and we'll walk you through it. Okay, Mila, you can go ahead. Okay, so I want you guys to save as much as possible. So, and I know that you're saying, Nikki, I don't have enough time to even make a dent in the bill, but I'm here to tell you every single dollar you guys save right now, you aren't taking out in a student loan. So every dollar is a good dollar, right? We got birthdays, we got holidays, we got graduation coming. Save that money, because when it comes to paying the bill, it's sort of a piecemeal approach, right? You're probably going to use some scholarship money, some savings, maybe a payment plan. That savings is a good chunk and can take a real dent out of any student loan debt that you have. And for folks that say, I'm not going to save because it's going to hurt my financial aid, just so you know, that's a myth. We do a whole section on how many times when you apply for aid, savings isn't even considered. So just keep in mind, save every dollar you guys can. Super important. And then I want you guys to start looking for scholarships now, if you can. Don't wait till senior year to do this. There are scholarships right now that you guys can apply for. Actually, if you go to our website, if you go to famemain.com/scholarships, we have a bunch of scholarships on our website that we list. But just, Google scholarships, like whatever's cool about you. Like there's a scholarship for, I have an autoimmune disease. There's actually an autoimmune disease scholarship. Who knew, right? So there's one for everybody. So go look for those scholarships now, check those out. And definitely keep doing this. Is a lifelong thing. Like you don't just do the senior year. You can start now, you can do this senior year, and then while you're in college, you keep looking because that free money's out there, guys. And a lot of people, I've heard recently, there are several scholarships where they've not had a lot of applicants, especially this year with the pandemic. Things are kind of up in the air. So they've extended deadlines. So even if you don't think your chances are great, they're probably better than you think they are. Just apply. It's free, right? Okay. Okay, and this is kind of the last step in getting ready to apply for financial aid. And this is something my juniors can do now. If you guys want to like get rolling on this tonight, every student is going to need an account with studentaid.gov to get into the FAFSA in October, okay? This account is what we refer to as the FSA ID, stands for Federal Student Aid ID. This is a username and password that students need to get into the FAFSA. But it also serves as your electronic signature for the FAFSA. If you take out a student loan, that's how you sign your student loan agreement. It's used for a bunch of different things on federal student aid websites. So here's the most important thing about doing this. I want you guys, when you set this up, to take your time. This takes like maybe 10 minutes. Take your time and fill it out, double check your information. I want you to double check that your social security number is correct. You're using your legal name that the Social Security Administration has on file, and your date of birth. I can tell you like 8 times out of 10, when someone says I have a problem with my FAFSA, it's that their username, when they set it up, there was something wrong with it. So let me just tell you what happens. When you set up this account with Federal Student Aid, you enter in your information, your legal name, your date of birth, your social security number. When you hit submit on that file goes to the Social Security Administration and it checks to make sure everything matches. And if you have a typo in your social, you're going to get an email a couple days later that says, hey, you want to try that again? Something went wrong. I mean, it's prettier than that, but basically that's what they're saying. Or you're going to get an email that says your FSA ID is ready to go. It's working perfectly. So take your time, just make sure your information is correct. So the student is going to need this. One parent, if parent information is needed on the FAFSA, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit, one parent also needs to have an account set up with studentaid.gov as well. So keep in mind that the student's going to need this username and password. The parent needs one as well. Now, here's the key to this. When you set this up, it's going to ask for a cell phone number that can receive texts and or an email address. So you want to have access to those two things when you set this up. You don't necessarily have to have both, but you got to have at least one. Now I have parents that don't use email or cell phones, so they're going to put in their child's information. When you set up an ID and you enter in a cell phone number or an email address, it's locked into that username and password. So if a parent goes to enter in that data, say this is my cell phone number or my email address, it's going to say it's already in use, you can't touch it. So you're going to need separate information as you are doing this. It is best if the student sets up their own username and password and the parent sets up their own username and password. So that's the best way to do that. Milo, can I have you move down one more slide? Just want to let you guys know there's a link. You can go on the famemain.com website and you can see that we have calculators and tools, and we have a bunch of stuff there, but this is what I want you guys to do. I want you to go and look. We created this tracking worksheet that when you guys set up your account with Federal Student Aid, I want you to write down your username, your password, the cell phone that you used when you set this up, the email address. Write that all down because you're going to need this for maybe the next 14 years. So keep in mind that every single year you go to do the FAFSA, you need this username and password to get in. Maybe 10 years down the road, if you need to change your payment plan on your student loan, you need this username and password to do that. So it's just super important. Write it down, keep it someplace safe. And if you can see on the bottom, there's a place for parent information to write down their stuff as well. Any questions, Milo? We usually have a question on the the username and password. Okay.
Sorry, I had muted myself so you couldn't hear me typing. No, we actually haven't had any questions about the Fsa Id yet, except for just confirming that students and parents each have to use their own email address and their own cell phone number. Those cannot be used more than once. So I was just mentioning the fact that it is really easy to set up a Gmail account. And that's one of the things that we recommend. Like if there's a family account, it's really good if the parent wants to use the family account. We want students to have their own account, and ideally we would like all high school juniors and seniors to be setting up something like a Gmail or a Yahoo account. We would prefer that when they set these up, and you might have said this, Nikki, because I was looking at something else, but we would prefer they don't use their high school email address, because that's going to go away. So it's a really good idea if high school students can have an email account that can go with them as they transition from high school to college and then to, life beyond that. So having a Gmail account that they can use would be great, and then that can free up maybe the family one for the parents to use.
Perfect. And I hadn't mentioned that, Mila, so thank you for mentioning that. Okay.
So as I mentioned, Nikki, I didn't put in some of the things in the chat, so I'm sorry about that, because yeah, I swear before I've been able to switch screens and grab that, but I apologize that I'm not able to tonight.
I tell you what, Mila, do you want to pick up now and I'll handle the chat?
That sounds great. Yeah, for anyone who's used Zoom a lot for the last year, every now and then it just seems like things change. And maybe it's our imagination, maybe it's whatever, but it seems like it happens. So I apologize. All righty. So again, I'm Mila, and not only have I worked in financial aid, as I had mentioned, for a long time at UMaine for 16 years, and I've been at FAME now for almost 13, actually. Probably more importantly tonight, I'm the mother of 2 kids. So like Nikki, having gone through this process as a parent, I think really opened up my eyes. I've got a 26-year-old and a 21-year-old. And so we definitely get the fact that this is kind of anxiety provoking. So again, we just really want to reassure you to ask your questions and to let you know that we're here for you. And we just want to do whatever we can to support you. So one of the questions that came up earlier was the question about filing the FAFSA, and do we have to wait till October 1st to file the 22-23 FAFSA? We're assuming that that's the FAFSA that most of you are going to be filing first, because that's the FAFSA that our juniors, our current high school juniors, the first FAFSA they will file is going to be the FAFSA for the 22-23 academic year. That's the FAFSA that's going to become available on October 1st of 21. I know all of these years get all, like, we literally have charts where we have to sit down and say, what year of FAFSA are we doing? When you do go to file the FAFSA, and again, for juniors, you're going to want to file the FAFSA in the fall of 21, ideally in October or November. You're going to go to fafsa.gov to file the FAFSA. That's the only place you should go to file the FAFSA. As Nikki mentioned, the FAFSA, the first definite, is free. So that's where you're going to want to go. If you do feel like you need help with the FAFSA, we're here to help you with it. So never pay anyone to help you with the FAFSA. It's meant to be a free process, and there's plenty of free support available as you navigate this process. You do have to file the FAFSA every single year, though. So that's something really important to kind of tuck away in the back of your mind. So we find that students who are in high school do a great job filing the FAFSA their senior year typically, but they don't always realize that they have to do it every single year. It's different than admissions. If you apply to a school and you love being at that particular school, you don't have to reapply for admission every year, but you do have to reapply for financial aid every single year. So we recommend that, if you have one of those, family calendars that you keep or something, it's never too early to put in, got to do the FAFSA in October for every single year where your student is going to be enrolled in school in the upcoming year. So the 22-23 FAFSA, that's the one that's going to cover the 22-23 academic year. So your students are graduating, in June of 22. They're going to potentially start college. Probably many of them, most of them start college in September of 22. So it's the 22-23 FAFSA they're going to be doing, and that becomes available this October in just a few months. We want people to be sure that they meet every single deadline out there. And Nikki mentioned the importance of deadlines and all of that. And the thing is that challenge is that every school has a different deadline. Some schools, have first come, first serve even. So we just want you to get the FAFSA done as early as possible. And that's why if we had our way, we would have as many of you get it done in October or November as possible. If you do it that early, you're going to be sure that you've met all of the deadlines out there. Most deadlines don't start till after the first of the year, although there are some in December. So if you do it October, November, you're going to be in really good shape when it comes to deadlines. Now, when you go to file the 22-23 FAFSA, you're going to find that it's going to require tax information from the 2020 year. So the year that we're just finishing up. I guess the tax deadline was pushed to the 17th until Monday. So the taxes that you're filing right now are going to be the taxes that you're going to provide information for when you file that FAFSA. Now, the good news is that one of the reasons that filing the FAFSA has become easier than ever is when you go to file the FAFSA, because you will have already filed your 2020 taxes, there is a tool that exists within the FAFSA. It's going to appear like magic within the FAFSA that will allow most families to transfer their tax information directly from the IRS. It's called the Irs Data Retrieval tool. And within the FAFSA, it will literally say, do you want to use this tool? And if you see the opportunity to use that tool, we want you to be sure that you do that, because it's going to, again, link you directly to the IRS. You're going to get there by using your Fsa Id. It's going to link you to the IRS. It's going to allow you to get your information, to grab it and transfer right back into the FAFSA. And literally, when it works, and it works most of the time, when it works, it literally is within seconds that it transfers that information back into the FAFSA. And we really want to be sure that you do that, because not only is it going to make filing the FAFSA easy and be sure that your information is accurate, we're going to talk about what happens after you file the FAFSA and how it's going to make even that part of the process a little bit easier. We'll talk about that in a moment. Now, for some of you, you might find that the last year or two has been, the income has been up and down and all over the place. So regardless of whether 2020 is better or worse or whatever might be your scenario, you have to use 2020 information when you file this FAFSA, okay? You have to use that as your starting point. But there is going to be a process, if you need to make sure that the school has updated information if you want them to look at a different year's worth of income, okay, rather than 2020. But for now, what you just need to know is that everyone filing the 22-23 FAFSA has to start by using their 2020 tax information, okay? That is just a given for everybody. Now, one of the things that's really important when you're filing the FAFSA to keep in mind that the FAFSA is a student application. So I'm incredibly guilty, all of you, of saying things like, I did the FAFSA or we did the FAFSA, but in reality, each of my kids are filing the FAFSA, okay? So the student is who is filing the FAFSA. And if you think about it that way, when you're in the FAFSA, it's going to make a lot more sense. The whole first half of the FAFSA is all about the student, okay? So the student usually can go in and do the first half of the FAFSA and find it's pretty much a piece of cake. About halfway through the FAFSA, what happens is there are a series of questions, and they're called the dependency status questions. And students will answer those questions, and depending on how they answer those questions, that is what determines whether or not parent information is required on the FAFSA. Most high school students are going to find that they are going to answer no to all of the dependency questions, which means that they will have to provide parent information. So you might wonder what those dependency questions are. They're things like, is the student 24 or going to be 24? Is the student married? Is the student in graduate school? Is the student a veteran? Is the student in the military on active duty? So you're going to find that most of these questions are going to be like, oh, okay, they don't apply. But there are some questions like, is the student in legal guardianship? Is the student in foster care? Is the student a ward of the court? Is the student homeless? So if you're here tonight with us, probably most of your students are going to find the answer to all of these questions is a no. But if you've got a student that you have in your life who has special circumstances, or maybe your student has friends who have special circumstances, we just want to be sure that people know there are ways to navigate this process, even for those students. But that's how you figure out whether or not you have to provide parent information on the FAFSA. If you can't answer yes to any of those questions, parent information is going to be required. So the vast majority of high school seniors do have to provide parent information on the FAFSA. So once you've determined that you do have to provide parent information, then the next question, probably one of the most commonly asked questions that we get, is who is the parent for the purposes of filing the FAFSA? And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you want to look at it, it is disconnected from all of the things that you might normally think about when you figure out who the parent is. So for example, it has nothing to do with how you file your tax return. This is going to change, but for right now, it has nothing to do with how you file your tax return. Instead, here's what you're going to do. You're going to take a look at your situation. You're going to say, as parents, are we married? Are the student's biological parents married to each other, or do we live in the same household? If the answer is yes, we're married to each other, or yes, we live in the same household, then you have to provide information for both of the parents. But if the situation is that the biological or adoptive parents, we use those interchangeably, are not married and don't live in the same household, then what you want to look at is who did the student live with most for the 12 months prior to when the FAFSA was filed. So again, if you're filing the FAFSA in October, who for the 12 months prior to that period of time, who did the student live with most? And that's the parent that is going to have to complete the FAFSA. And believe it or not, the other parent doesn't have to provide any financial information on the FAFSA. That is the only determining factor for the 22-23 FAFSA. Okay, who did the student live with most? Which parent? Now, once you've identified which parent that is, so let's just say that my husband and I are not married, we don't live together. The student lives with me 60% of the time and with dad 40% of the time. Then I'm going to be the parent who fills out the FAFSA. Then I have to say, what is my marital status as of today? And as of today, or the day I file the FAFSA, if I'm married, then my spouse, the student's step parent, also has to provide financial information on the FAFSA. And that's what people don't get really excited about. They're really happy when we say the first part, right? That the non-custodial parent, I guess you could say, doesn't have to provide any financial information. But when the parent who is identified as having to fill out the FAFSA is remarried, then their spouse does have to provide financial information on the FAFSA. And that's not something that can be worked around. The school can't make an exception to that. That just is what is required by the federal student aid regulations. Okay, so if you have questions about that, let us know. One of the other things that when you're filling out the FAFSA that you're going to find as you move through the financial section is that many of you are going to see different questions. So not everyone has to answer all of the same questions on the FAFSA. Again, what makes the FAFSA easier than it ever used to be to complete is that there's something called skip logic built into the FAFSA. And what that means is the FAFSA only asks the questions that are relevant to your situation and will skip questions that are not relevant to your situation. So for example, this question is going to go away, but for the 22-23 year, males still do have to register with the Selective Service in order to be eligible for federal financial aid funds. But guess what? If you have a daughter or if you are a female and you fill out the FAFSA, you're never even going to know that a Selective Service question gets asked because it skips right over that. It only appears for male students. So that's an example of how skip logic is going to work. And skip logic is in full force when you get to the financial section. And families who have lower incomes are going to find that they can often skip a lot of information, including asset information. So when Nikki talked about saving for college, and we know how difficult it is to save for college, but we really want people, if at all possible, to save whatever they can, because savings has virtually no impact on financial aid eligibility for most families and only very minimal impact for other families. And the reason is that for many families, they aren't going to have to provide any asset information at all on the FAFSA. They're going to be able to skip all of the asset questions. So when you're moving through the FAFSA, anytime you're asked, can I skip these questions? You want to say yes, because if you're given the opportunity to skip them, it means they're not relevant to your specific situation and they're not going to impact your financial aid eligibility. But for those of you who are not given the opportunity to skip your questions on the assets, do be sure that if you're asked about your assets, you know which assets you need to include and which ones you don't. So it might surprise you to learn that when you're filing the FAFSA, even if you are required to provide asset information, typically people's most significant assets are excluded. So what's excluded? Your primary residence. The home that you live in is completely excluded from the FAFSA. So that is not anything you need to take a look at or wonder about or research when you fill out the FAFSA. Your primary residence is completely excluded. Additionally, if you have retirement funds sitting out there waiting for you to retire, the value of those retirement funds are completely excluded from the FAFSA. Additionally, if you own a small family-owned business with fewer than 100 full-time employees, the value of that small family-owned business is completely excluded from the FAFSA. So for many families, those are their most significant assets. So if you are required to provide asset information, what do you include? You're going to include things like your checking account, your savings account. If you have a college savings plan, you are going to have to, think about that and how much that's worth. You're going to think about second properties. If you have a camp, if you have any value in a camp or a second property, or if you have non-retirement investments. But even if you do have any of those and you have to list those on the FAFSA, just know that there's very little impact that you're going to feel from having assets. So again, why we hope families are able to save some money and put some money aside for college, because they're going to find it's going to open up options, but it's not going to negatively impact financial aid eligibility. So Nikki, I've seen a couple questions come in.
Yeah, I think I can summarize it. Just to verify, if you have a blended family like I do, my kids have 4 parents total. My husband was divorced from his previous wife. We don't all live in the same household, right? So we had to figure out when we did my kids' FAFSA, who do they live with the most during the year? They live with their mom and stepdad more than us. So on my stepchildren's FAFSA, it's mom and stepdad. We weren't on there because they live with her more than us. But then, for some people, they have 50-50 split, like right down the middle. They do half the week or maybe every other week, and it's 50-50. In those situations, you're going to go with who provides the most financial support to that student. And that could mean a lot more than just child support. It could mean who's paying for the student's health insurance or other expenses that comes up. And, just kind of make a list of all the expenses that you have for that child to see who's providing the most support. So it might be who's paying child support. It might be, the person who's receiving it. Could go either way. So, but if there's more questions on this, guys, please feel free to reach out to us and we'll chat about it.
Yeah, and I think this is probably one of our most common questions is about who fills out the FAFSA. And one of the reasons why we're really, really glad that you're here with us tonight is if you go back to that starting point, which it's the parent that the student lives with most for the 12 months prior to filing the FAFSA. That's currently the way the regulations read. You have time to do something about that. So it's a great opportunity to think about if you are one of these families where it really is 50-50, take a look at your situation. And, if your student can live with the parent where that's going to be more beneficial, a little bit more than the other parent, you have time to do that. And there's nothing wrong with doing that. It's just like the tax code. We know the tax code. We try to use it in a way that's most beneficial. We're not breaking the law by knowing what the law is. So for those of you who do have that very even split, take some time to think about how maybe you can make that rule work in a way that's advantageous to your actual situation. Okay, it is going to change in the 23-24 year. We're not going to go into the details of that tonight, but just know that there are some significant changes coming to some questions like that on the FAFSA. But for the upcoming year, we're going to stick with how they are now. The other thing, before we're going to go on, we're going to have a little fun pop quiz in a moment. But the other thing is, Nikki had mentioned earlier that the Css Profile. So there are schools like Bates, Bowdoin, and Colby, and then Massachusetts and Boston area. There are many schools that use the Css Profile. One of the reasons why schools use the Css Profile to determine eligibility for their financial aid funds is, guess what? They want to know about all of those parents. So on the FAFSA, you're going to provide more limited financial information. But if you have to do a Css Profile, as Nikki described her blended family, all 4 parents would be listed on that CSS profile. So just kind of keep that in mind, that that's one of the ways that form is different. Another way in which that form is different is that the primary residence, the value of your primary residence, would also have to be included on the profile. So those are the ways in which it digs in a little bit deeper than the FAFSA does. All right, are we ready for this, Nick? Any reason not to move ahead? Okay.
Go for it.
All righty. So here's our quick poll for tonight. If the student is considered dependent on the FAFSA, so you can answer yes to any of those dependency questions, who needs an FSA ID? So here we go. Let's see what the answers are. So go ahead if you would like. We'd love to know what you think. Watching the answers come in. You guys are doing a super job.
We need some Jeopardy music for this part.
Yeah. Do, 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 do. You would even, I can't sing and I can't even do that. That's not humming. I don't know what you would call that. It's bad. All righty. Okay, we've got virtually everyone. We won't make everyone, if you don't want to participate, that's just fine. But I would like to say that 95% of our participants believe that it is the student and 1 parent. And that is correct. So the student and 1 parent will need to have their FSA ID. They each need to have their own FSA ID with their own email address and their own separate cell phone number. All right, Nikki, is there a question about that before we move on?
No, someone just asked if the chat is available, going to be available later. And I believe the chat is viewable on the recording, but if folks, I think you can actually, even in the chat, there's 3 dots, you can save the chat, but I'm not really sure what that looks like in Zoom world for participants. But if there's anything in particular you guys want, I'm going to throw my email in the chat and you can always email me later if you guys have questions.
And Nikki, if you don't mind putting mine in, that'd be great. I would appreciate that tremendously. So that way you've got both of us, and one of us is on vacation. Nikki needs to take some time off. So yeah, so then if you get out of office, you can check in with the other one. All right, so moving on. We put together this graphic a couple of years ago, and I think this has really helped to demonstrate why we talk so much about deadlines. You know, in the perfect world, every school would have all of the financial aid that they need available to provide, to fill the need of every single student out there. But unfortunately, schools don't all have enough money. Some schools have a good amount of financial aid, but there are other schools that really struggle with the amount of financial aid. That's why we want you to start researching schools early, check the percent of need that they meet, check out net price calculator. So you have a whole bunch of schools, not too many, but you have a list of schools that include schools that are going to have good financial aid available. And then the key is making sure that you apply on time. So here is a pretend example, but based on real life. If we have a student that's in a situation where they have a 0 EFC or expected family contribution, that means when they file the FAFSA demonstrates the fact that this family has no resources to contribute to paying for college, that they really have nothing available and they're totally reliant on financial aid to pay their bill. So the student is in that situation and they file their FAFSA, and let's say the school is a $25,000 a year school, and they file their FAFSA by November 1st. They get all sorts of different types of financial aid. They get their Pell Grant, they get their state grant, they get some SEOG, that's a type of federal financial aid. They get some money from the school, they get their work study, they get their loan. They get a good amount of financial aid, enough that with a little bit of savings potentially, a little bit of summer earnings, the student's going to be able to find a way to make this school affordable. But let's just say that student's friend files their FAFSA after the school's deadline. And let's say the deadline is February 1st or March 1st. They file their FAFSA, but not until April. What happens then? well, then they're considered for whatever financial aid is left. So certain types of funds like Pell Grant, Main State Grant would still be available in April. The student would be considered for those, but there are other types of funds that have been spent. They just simply are not available any longer. So the student's awarded as much aid as the school can give them, excuse me, but as you can see, it's significantly less than if they had met the deadline. And then there's the student who will file the FAFSA over the summer. And this just literally breaks Nikki's and my heart, because we have students that are going to file the FAFSA. We've been wishing they would do so prior to now, but they won't do it until over the summer. And then what they're going to be eligible for is potentially just a Pell Grant and a loan, because the Main State Grant has a deadline of May 1st. The school deadlines have all passed. The schools have run out of all of their other funding. And so that's what's left. So the big takeaway here, there's two. One is just be sure that you meet deadlines, because that is the best way to maximize your financial aid eligibility. And the other piece for this chart that I'd like people to kind of think about is this is why sometimes students end up borrowing more than we wish that they would borrow, is because they missed deadlines and they applied later. And because they did that, they got less financial aid. And if they had applied on time, they might not have needed to borrow anywhere near as much as they did. So maximizing financial aid eligibility and keeping student loan debt down, best way to accomplish that is to be sure to file early and meet deadlines. All right, my last section before I turn it over to Nikki is just to talk about what happens after the FAFSA gets filed. So it's mid-October, you're filing the FAFSA, and you hit that submit button. And when you hit the submit button, what's going to happen is that FAFSA data is going to go to the Federal Student Aid Processing Center. They're going to do their thing and they're going to process that FAFSA. It's going to take probably 2 to 3 days in October because it's a little bit busier. What's going to happen after that is the student is going to get an email that indicates that their FAFSA has been processed and that there's something called a student aid report available. So the student aid report is literally just a summary of the FAFSA information, but it also has other information on it, like what steps are still required. So it's really important that students review the student aid report to see what has to happen next, but also to make sure that they didn't make a mistake. Over the years, I know Nikki and I have seen so many families who swap numbers, who added a 0 onto the end of something. They've just made some mistake, and anything is fixable. We just need to know that the mistake was made. So we really want to be sure that people review their student aid report. You will get an email that will tell you that, but here's what you can also do. Just always go back to fafsa.gov. When you go back to fafsa.gov and log in with the FSA ID, you are going to see, once your FAFSA has been submitted, you're going to see what the current process is, or that this has been processed successfully, that it's still being processed. And additionally, you are going to see a link where you can just go and click on the student aid report and check it out. So we really recommend that within, the first week or two after the FAFSA is filed, please go back and double check that student aid report to make sure that everything looks correct. When you're getting the email that's letting you know that your FAFSA has been processed, about simultaneously, you are going to find out that the schools that were listed on your FAFSA are also going to be receiving that information electronically. So the schools that you list will automatically get all of your FAFSA data, and you won't need to take any extra steps. Listing them on your FAFSA is all you need to do to be sure that they get that information. At that point in time, what is going to happen is that the schools are going to be connecting with you. So you're pretty much at this point done dealing with the federal government. It's going to be the schools from that point forward that are going to be your point of connection. Oh, I lied. I had one more screen here. A moment ago, when I was talking about using the Irs Data Retrieval tool. And one of the reasons why we want people to use the Irs Data Retrieval tool is that when you file for financial aid, there's a certain portion of students who get selected for something called verification. Now, if you ever see that you're selected for verification, first of all, don't panic. It doesn't mean that you did anything wrong. They tell us it's a random selection, but in reality, it seems to be students who are most likely to get federal financial aid. Those tend to be the students who are selected for verification. However, if you use the Irs Data Retrieval tool, your likelihood of being selected for verification drops dramatically. And that's because they know that your information came directly from the IRS, so they don't need to verify it, okay? So use the Irs Data Retrieval tool, much less likely that you're going to be selected for verification. And if you are, what you're going to have to verify is going to be a much more limited number of questions or items, okay? But if you are selected, no big deal. Don't stress about it. Just make sure that you provide the schools with whatever information is required. But this is the other piece, is that the verification is done at the school level. So if you notice, and if you can see this on your student aid report, if you notice that you're selected for verification, just know that if you've got 7 schools listed on your FAFSA, each 7 of those schools is going to need you to complete that verification process. So that's why it's important to kind of find that sweet spot with schools. You want to apply to enough schools to have some really great options. But, you know, I had someone this year that did 29. Too many. All right, this really is my last slide, and then I'm turning over to Nikki. So one last question before you've got Nikki back. When does the FAFSA become available each year? So here's the question, everybody. Sorry, I want to go to my other question. All righty, here we go. So when does the FAFSA become available each year? Oh my gosh, this is coming in amazing, people. Quick, fast, and accurate. You're killing it.
Love it.
You guys are killing it. So 100% accuracy, October 1st. Right, so October 1st is the day the FAFSA becomes available. Great job, everybody. We actually don't recommend you do it on October 1st. If there's going to be any little glitches in the system, they're going to be October 1st. We're bigger fans of like the 3rd, 4th, 5th. Anytime in the month of October is absolutely fabulous. So with that, Nikki, I will take over the questions and have you.
I just quickly answered a question. You probably can add more to that, but someone had asked, when you do that Irs Data Retrieval tool, do we assume that the schools get that data? Absolutely. What you'll see is that the questions that have been answered from you from that data just says transfer from the IRS. You can't see what was pulled in, but we know it's correct. Even if it's a 0, like some people may not have a credit or something, that what they pulled in was a 0. So you can safely know that the schools will get that information if you link to the IRS. So great question. Okay, so let's go on with the types of aid. So let's say you've been accepted at a school, the financial aid office looks at your FAFSA, they're going to send you what's called a financial aid offer. And these are the things that may be on your offer. I hope you see scholarships and grants, and that's where I do my happy dance, because that is free money. Free money. We don't have to repay that, right? It can come from the federal government, the state of Maine. It can come from the school itself or from private entities, or it could be like from the VFW, or it could be like from someone who left the college a bunch of money and said, give people the Nikki Vachon Scholarship Fund, which I hope will be set up in my honor someday. You may also see work study, and work study is a job on campus. When you see it on the financial aid offer, sometimes it looks like it's money that's just there ready to pay the bill. It is not. Work study is the possibility of you getting a job on campus, you know, finding a job, getting hired, working some hours and getting a paycheck, right? So that's kind of what work study is, but it's kind of on that financial aid offer. It's there because it comes from federal dollars from doing the FAFSA. If you don't see work study on your financial aid offer, but you do want a job on campus, at my school, we didn't have enough work study funds in that pot of money to hire all of our students. So we set up our own pot of money. We called it Job Bank. Other schools call it something different. But we could hire other students. So if you do want to work on campus, but you don't see work study on your offer, go down to the work study office and say, I'd like a job, and just see if there's some available, because you never know if that might happen for you. But that's what that is. Can you move ahead, Milo? Every student who does the FAFSA will be eligible for a federal student loan, and you're going to see that on your financial aid offer as well. If you need to borrow to go to school, just keep in mind, this is where we want you to start, because this is the cheapest loan out there. If it says subsidize on it, subsidize, that is, the government is subsidizing this loan for you. That's a 0% interest loan while the student's in school. So how many times in our life do we see a 0 interest loan? The direct student loans are not only the cheapest option, they're in the student's name. They don't have to be paid back until after school. There's other options like if you can't make your payments because you lost your job, you can ask for a deferment. There's like 8 different repayment plans, so it's super flexible. And if you work for a public service entity like a nonprofit or government agency, you might have some loan forgiveness. So that's kind of the deal with student loans. We put a lot of information on famemain.com to explain more about student loans, but that's other things that might be on your financial aid offer. Go ahead, Milo. So that financial aid offer can come in a few different ways. When I worked in aid, we would mail financial aid offers to our first year students. And then every year after that, the students would get an email at their student email address that would have their offer. Now this past year, I think it was a little wonky with the mail. There was like a lot of slowdown with it. So sometimes the students may like be waiting and not seeing their financial aid offer. Many times you can see the same information on student portals. So if you have access to a student portal, it's always great to go look there and see like if you have a financial aid offer there, you can get more information if it hasn't come in the mail. You have to be accepted for admissions in order to get that offer. So I was just working with someone the other day who had filed their FAFSA, but they hadn't heard anything. And I'm like, well, are you accepted yet? And they're like, no, not yet. I just don't know if I can afford it. I'm like, you got to apply before they'll even look at your FAFSA. So go ahead and make sure you do that application as well. Keep in mind, we want you to do that FAFSA as soon as you can after it opens up after October 1st. And then it's like a hurry up and wait situation. So you've done the FAFSA, you got it done. You may not hear from the school until at least January. Keep in mind that it takes a while for the school's software to get set up and schools to have their budget to know how much they're spending before you hear back. So keep in mind, it does take a little while to get that. But make sure you're watching email a lot. After you file the FAFSA, if the school needs something for you, if they got your FAFSA and they have some questions, their first line of communication is usually email. So just make sure you are watching that email regularly after you submit your FAFSA. Go ahead, Milo. So when you get financial aid offers, I'm hoping you guys apply to a bunch of schools and you're sitting there with all these financial aid offers in front of you saying like, cool, what does this mean to me, right? We want you to find the net cost at each school. So at school A, it costs me this much out of pocket for 1 year. School B, this is what it costs. Remember, cost is, the cost to go there minus the grants and scholarships. That's your net cost. We created a worksheet, and you can get that on the famemain.com website. I'm going to put a link in the chat. Just so that you guys, when you get your financial aid offers, you can really compare and see what's going to be the most affordable for you guys. When you start looking at, like, I really love this school, but like, it's like looking for a house. Like, you love the house, but can you afford the payments? So this is a great way to see what's going to be a good affordable option for you. If you guys have to borrow for your entire net cost, keep in mind that this is a great way to try to figure out what your total student loan debt will be for however long you're going to be there. So how much do you have to borrow for your whole education? So let's say I'm going to be at school A for 4 years and I need $10,000. If I have to borrow $40,000, is that okay? Is that going to be doable for me? Well, we recommend that you don't borrow more than your first year's salary for your entire education. So if you can look up your potential salary for your first year of working, then you know that's kind of your limit. That's your guide to how much we want you to borrow. So if my first year salary is $40,000 or above, I know taking out a $40,000 loan is going to be doable for me. So I'm going to put in the chat, there's a website we use, is Department of Labor. that it's called Career One Stop, where you can look up starting salaries, and that kind of gives you a good guide as to what the cutoff point. Basically, I don't want you to borrow $100,000 in student loan debt for a $30,000 a year job. Super hard to repay. Okay, go ahead, Mila. Mila, did you want to jump in at any point? Is that all right to keep rolling, or whatever?
Keep rolling.
Like? Keep rolling. Okay, great. So Mila had talked a little bit earlier about when you file the FAFSA in October, it's going to be asking for 2020 income. And 2020 and 2021 has been wild, right? Many people have lost jobs, have gone to part-time. There's been a lot of changes in salary. So when you're filing the FAFSA, if you are thinking to yourself, this does not reflect my financial situation right now. Maybe I lost my job at the end of 2020 and now I haven't been working since. There's always been something in place called an appeal, where you can talk to the financial aid office and say, okay, my FAFSA says this, but this is really what my situation is. That's a financial aid appeal. And you can do this for a variety of reasons. Most of the time, it's when people's income has changed. Like something's affecting your ability to pay. You want to talk to financial aid and say, this is my situation. It might be that since you filed the FAFSA, your parents got a divorce, and now there's only one income in the household, when before there was two. I've had a parent pass away. So keep in mind that income, there's a 2-income household, now there's only one. But maybe there's medical expenses, or maybe a parent is going to college. Maybe you had to have the roof replaced. Whatever your situation is, if you need to contact financial aid and say, hey, this is my situation, that's definitely something that's very common. We put together some tips. I'm going to put that in the chat to kind of walk you through when to do it, what they're going to be looking for. And it's just kind of a guide as to how to do your appeal. Okay, you can go ahead, Marla. Okay. So this is what we are dealing with. Usually around this time of year, people get their financial aid offers. They've decided on a school they want to go to, but they're really struggling. Like, how do I make this happen? Well, this is a kind of our list of things we go through to say, okay, let's see how we can knock that bill down. The first thing I'm going to say is, do you have any savings? Because even if it's just a little bit, keep in mind that we owe this much. If we can take a little off the top with that savings, maybe we can do the rest in a payment plan. This is generally an agreement you make with the school where it's no interest charged. You might have to pay a small fee, but they're going to take your bill for the semester and divide it up into payments. So maybe you can't come up with that whole payment right now, but maybe you could do it in a payment plan. There's also other types of student loans. So there's a Parent Plus loan in the parent's name, or there's private loans that's in the student's name with a cosigner. There's other loan options, and you guys can do a variety of these things. You can do part payment plan and part loan. So keep in mind, there's a lot of options there. But again, we always want to make sure that that debt is as low as possible. TheLoanForMe.com is a great website with a lot of information about education loans. So go check that out. I also want to mention as a bonus that when you are in college or your child is in college, there are great tax credits for being in college. So to give you an example, my husband he's a teacher, but he also has this freelance gig, right? So we have a small business. We always end up paying in taxes until my stepson went to college, and he's the one we claim on our taxes. And we got this tax credit, you guys. We got a refund, and that was like Mardi Gras. It was like a big deal for us, right? We got a refund for the first time in forever. We used that refund to pay for next year. So it's sort of like a strategy on how to pay the bill. So there's some tax credits out there. When you're filing your taxes, make sure that your tax preparer knows that you have someone in college. Okay.
Yeah, I was just going to say real quick, Nikki, I know Nikki's heard me use this analogy a ton of times, but it's that piece of pie. You know, imagine paying for college as being a piece of pie. And the more pieces that you have, and this is why we're so glad you're here with us tonight, none of the pieces need to be quite as big. So if you've got merit-based aid, if you've got need-based aid, if you've got some savings, even if you're just starting now and your student's putting a little bit away over the summer, if you can do some of it in a tuition payment plan, you know, the more of those pieces that you have outside scholarships, you know, it just makes it much more manageable. And I think that's when we've seen families be the most successful and find paying for college more manageable.
Okay, so we're just rounding out. I just want to make sure you guys know there's all kinds of resources out there. I mentioned famemain.com/publications. In that pay book, page 23 and 24 is a junior year and senior year planning checklist. I always tell people, like, if you're, you can go to our website, order a copy, or you can just print it out, or, you know, just bookmark it. This kind of gives you an idea of what you should be doing and when. Just so you know, like, this is a year-long process, and there's things that you can be doing in junior year to start getting ready to applying for and paying for college. So that's a great resource for you. Can I have you move on?
Sure can.
A ton of stuff out there, just so you know. We love our checklists. So we've got some transition to college checklists. So over the summer, when you're not sure what size sheets to get for the dorm or whatever, we've got great checklists out there. We also do a lot of financial literacy stuff. So we have a publication on personal finance. And then as you guys are researching colleges, we have our plan book that really has great information about what to look for when you do a college tour, and a worksheet where you can rate them or take notes on them. So that a lot of great stuff out there. Your school counselors are an amazing resource for you guys. Definitely reach out, talk to the financial aid office even before you're a student. Their job is also to help recruit you. So keep in mind that they are there for you as you guys have questions even before you enroll. So don't ever feel like you can't reach out to them at all. Mila had mentioned getting on our mailing list to make sure you guys sign up so we can text you. We're not going to text you a bunch of stuff, but we will tell you in October it's time to do your FAFSA. We'll send that reminder to you. So all kinds of good stuff out there. Keep going. If you guys need help and like you can't reach Mila or me, give us a call at our 800 number. This is our customer service team, and they are awesome. They are so amazing. Either they have been to school themselves or have had kids go through it. So they are all well-versed in questions about applying for aid, all the good stuff. So education@famemain.com is our general email box. There you go. One more.
Sorry, I was in the chat.
Yeah, no, that's okay. So I just want to say that this is it for us. If you guys have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Looks like someone is touring a school tomorrow. That's exciting.
Yeah, so
for the tours, that is in the plan publication at famemain.com. I'll put a link to that publication in our checklist, Mila. Did you want to have something you want to add?
yeah, I was just going to say, so pay, you guys got the email, so you should have that in your email. But as Nikki's mentioning, all of the other publications are available and they can be just downloaded and you can just look at them or do whatever you would like, or we can send them to you if you want us to do that. So yes, if Nikki puts in plan, that would be great. And you can see that. The other thing that's out there, Nikki, that I'm thinking might be helpful is we do have a guide to college fairs. And I know you're not going to a college fair tomorrow, but on the back of the guide to college fairs, there are some questions that are kind of the typical questions that we like families to be thinking about and asking the schools about. So some of them are based on the academics. Some of them are based on, the housing stuff and all of that. So that's another resource that might be good. But what I love about Plan is it actually, like Nikki said, it allows you to make notes and to kind of rank them based on what the criteria is that's most important to you. So I just saw a question about going to school in Massachusetts. Let me just make sure I read it correctly. So the FAFSA is for all federal financial aid. So every school uses the FAFSA to determine eligibility for all federal financial aid funds. Maine schools are going to use it to determine eligibility for the Maine state grant. And then a lot of schools use it to determine eligibility for their own institutional money. So yes, regardless of what state you're looking at, you want to be sure you fill out the FAFSA. And a question came up earlier in the chat that even for people who are looking at schools outside of the country, so a lot of schools in Canada, or we were talking about St. Andrews in Scotland, a lot of schools participate in the federal financial aid program, even though they're out of the country. You can only get federal student loans, but those can still be helpful. So yeah, our rule of thumb is really everybody do the FAFSA. It takes maybe a half an hour. We're here to help. It's free. And it is what opens up financial aid eligibility for the vast majority of types of aid at the vast majority of schools throughout the US and beyond. Okay, so hopefully that answered that question. So if I wasn't clear, let me know. Anything else? All righty. Well, I am going to stop recording. I'm going to say thank you very much for being here with us tonight. Nikki and I'll stay on for just a second longer, just to make sure everyone is all set. But I'm going to stop that now. And but we're here for you going forward. So look for additional presentations from us. Visit our website, join our mailing list. We're excited to work with you in the coming year. So have a great evening and take care.